problem that I see with Google Analytics and other client-side tracking is while they're easy to use and easy to implement, which I think is the benefit for a lot of teams, I don't find the data comprehensive enough or raw enough, let's call it. You try to get more granular in Google Analytics, you run into sampling errors. And I think the biggest limitation to me is you just can't as easily connect the marketing and web data to the product data. Sure, you could create conversion goals and events and that sort of thing and instrument it that way, but it's not the raw product analytics. It's almost like a proxy for those events and actions.
What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Simon Heaton, Director of Growth Marketing at Buffer. Simon started his career in the agency world at Banfield in Ottawa, Canada, and he later moved over to Shopify, where he would spend nearly 7 years, first as a content marketing manager and later as the senior growth lead for all of acquisition. Simon's also worn a part-time teaching hat for over 5 years. He was an instructor with the Telfer School of Management at the University of Ottawa, as well as a professor at Algonquin College. He's a startup mentor for founders that are part of the Singapore-based equity fund at Antler, and today Simon is Director of Growth Marketing at Buffer, the world-renowned social media management platform. Simon, thanks so much for your time today. Really pumped to chat.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. Excited to be here too.
You made my first question really easy for me. Recently on LinkedIn, you posted about all the tools that you have in Buffer's Martech stack. And, you have some pretty well-known products in there: Customer IO for automation, Ahrefs for SEO, Typeform, Figma, Segment, Mixpanel, Buffer, obviously, eating your own dog food there. Not sure if you had a chance to check out Scott Brinker's State of Martech report that dropped, I think, a couple weeks ago. We're recording this in the middle of May. But there's one really interesting question in his report that he asked a lot of survey responders. What would you say is the center of your marketing stack, kind of the orchestrator? And the most popular answer amongst recipients or respondents was the CRM. And what I found really interesting from your list that you shared on LinkedIn is that Buffer doesn't list a CRM. What would you say is the center of your marketing tech stack? And does Buffer even have a CRM?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Phil. So at Buffer, we don't traditionally use a CRM like HubSpot or Salesforce. I'd say there's two kind of main reasons why we don't do that. So we're very much a product-led growth first company. We don't have a sales motion at Buffer, so there's no sales team, there's no account managers. And so the traditional requirements from a commercial or like a revenue perspective don't really apply to Buffer. Lead routing, scoring, those sort of things aren't as prevalent in our user flow as some of the more enterprise style organizations that have a robust revenue org in place. And then I'd say from like a marketing perspective, our gross motions, aren't as overly complex enough to require like a CRM to, orchestrate their delivery. What I would say is our closest tool in the stack to a CRM, it's probably our data warehouse, as a very product first and data first team. Our CDP, which is Segment, as you mentioned, is truly the brain of the operations of what we do. Where that information is surfaced for the team could be something like our product analytics tool, Mixpanel. Everyone can get in there and use that and find information about a user or a customer. Or it could even be the marketing automation platform, Customer IO, which has pretty much all of the comms that our users receive. And so I sort of go to those two to understand usage patterns, trends, and find details about a user. And I would say Mixpanel in particular has been an awesome tool for us at Buffer. It's been set up really well by our data science team, and it's loaded with pretty much all, not only product usage data, but also marketing data as well. I think I mentioned in that post that we implemented some tracking on the server side to facilitate this. And we're also, piping data not just from the website into Mixpanel, but also from these tools as well: AdWords, Customer IO, Pendo, you name it. All these sources are coming into Mixpanel, so we can sort of get that broader story of our users and stitch together, how marketing efforts are really impacting the product lifecycle, the user lifecycle, more downstream than let's say website metrics.
Very cool. Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I was assuming that there probably wasn't a big sales team at Buffer, but you can actually see like salaries. So I was like creeping on there, and I didn't see like a sales development role or anything like that. So the full, true like product led motion there. I think that in the report that Scott Brinker did, there was probably I think he breaks it down by B2B and B2C after. And what I found interesting by chatting with folks in the industry that are in B2C and even like overseas marketers that are still in B2B, this like term of CRM and marketing automation, there's actually like a lot of like misnaming and overlap in there. Like in Europe, a lot of folks that use marketing automation, they call it a CRM. Like it's just like a customer relationship management tool. I'm sending emails, I'm engaging with my customers. They call it a CRM. But like in North America, especially in B2B, the CRM is really like we have a sales led motion and leads come in from marketing automation. They're synced into Salesforce or HubSpot. And we have like all these like sales statuses, and we need to like go through pipeline and try to predict like who's going to close, who's not going to close. So it's an interesting world. And yeah, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would even say, in the craft of marketing automation, you really have that dichotomy as well, where there's a huge portion of individuals that are really, marketing ops from a revenue perspective of yeah,
Mm,
like lead scoring, routing, nurturing towards SQL and MQL type metrics, where for Buffer, some of those concepts do apply, like qualification, but yeah, like you said, we don't have an account team, we don't have a sales team, and so really the product is 100% self-serve, and so marketing automation for us is sort of the supportive motion of getting those users through the product lifecycle.
yeah, very cool. I was like thinking of what my answer would be to that question. Like, what is the orchestrator in my tech stack? And it's a bit of a confusing question because, like, the orchestrator is maybe the one like activating that data and doing something with it. But really, you can't do anything with the data if you don't have the data in the first place. So, like, what is the center of the stack? I think a lot of folks just went to the CDP or the data warehouse, whether you're composable or like you're all in on a CDP platform. I know you guys are using Segment. I've used it in past companies also. For me, like the orchestrator of my stack, I think is always going to be the marketing automation platform, especially from like a marketing point of view. But like everything that matters like should end up in that automation tool to be able to like power growth messaging, right? And I know Buffer is like you said, a big fan of customer IO as your marketing automation platform. Maybe walk us through like what you love most about it, and maybe share like some of the cool workflows that you've created with your team so far. I don't know like how hands-on you are in customer IO these days. I know you guys are still pretty small, so maybe you are getting your hands dirty still.
Yeah, and that's one of the beauties of working at a smaller kind of team like Buffers. Yeah, I'm able to get my hands dirty and involved in the work of the day to day, which I particularly love to do. So, yes, I'm deep in customer IO. Actually, I've used it a few times in my career. The first time I came across it was at Shopify, actually. So in the earlier days, it was the automation tool that we used, and it
Hmm.
was already in place when I joined Buffer. Eventually Shopify grew out of it, and I think switched over to Salesforce Marketing Cloud to facilitate, some more of these enterprise motions that we were speaking about. But at Buffer, we still use it. We really like it. We use it largely to facilitate our email marketing and push notifications for our mobile apps. So that's set up via their SDK. And we also run both our marketing programs, communication, lifecycle, blog, newsletter, those kind of things through the platform, as well as our transactional programs as well. So you can think of like billing, product notifications, account setup, security messages, those kind of things. Personally, I love it. I find it an incredibly powerful platform, particularly for that scale up sized org that maybe has outgrown maybe a more accessible email tool, and are looking for something a little bit more robust that can have more segmentation, personalization opportunities based off of the data that they have. Um, it's an overall, yeah, an incredibly complex and comprehensive platform. Um, I really enjoy, like out of the gate, the journey mapping functionality. The WYSIWYG editor makes it really easy for the team to pick up, especially if they're not overly technical, super user friendly. But they also have some of those deep technical capabilities that you can make everything from scratch, from HTML through the API, things like that, which we require. Um, I think I mentioned this, but the transactional element of customer IO is really interesting because I know in a lot of organizations we split that up. You'll have,
Hmm.
your marketing comms coming from one thing, and then maybe your product comms coming from SendGrid or some sort of
Yeah.
other, distinct platform. Um, we've really put the effort into to have these all living customer IO so that we have sort of a singular view of all of the communications a user's getting, because regardless of whether it's like a marketing communication message or something from the product to the user, it's still buffer, right? It's the same person that's sending it for them, the business at least, and we want to just make sure we have full visibility over that experience, and we're able to take into account those different touch points, not only the marketing ones. So that's been super valuable to us, and the beauty of that is that it also has dedicated IP pools for the transactional servers to send from, so it's very reliable. We're able to safeguard those emails and the domain reputation from marketing sends and more broadcast based messaging that we do. Um, and I would say there's a I mentioned earlier too, the segment integration. So we use segment as CPD for buffer, and the integration with customer IO is like integral for us. Like I said, all of our data is in segment, and I treat marketing automation platforms as an equal to like a data or product analytics platform. We need to make sure that it has the right data coming in, formatted accurately, and the right data coming out in a timely manner. And so being able to rely on the integration with Segment, that is how we pipe up everything else in Buffer, has been an incredible unlock for us, and has allowed us to, leverage, user data, product data in really unique and interesting ways within the workflows, whether that's, you know, snippet personalization through Liquid within the emails themselves, or for more robust kind of workflow customization based on certain actions that users take or do not take. We've been really able to light up some really cool and interesting lifecycle programs to support our users' success with the product, thanks to the power of the tool itself.
Very cool. Appreciate the detail and all the stuff you shared there. I actually just recently got back into Customer IO after they decided to sponsor the show. We migrated our newsletter for the podcast from Mailchimp to Customer IO. I used it heavily when I was at Close. I spent like a full year and a half getting really deep in the product and fell in love with like the visual interface is like the first thing that's like striking. Like I came
Yeah.
from a world of Marketo, and so
Okay.
I was
Yeah.
like logging into Customer IO and building visual workflows, and I just fell in love with that. And I told myself like I'm never gonna use Marketo again, but I'm not closing that door on it forever. But I was like surprised. Like I think it's like a year and a half, or no, probably a bit more, two and a half years since I used it. So logging in again, some of the cool things that jumped out to me that I know you guys are using is like holdout functionality, holdout testing functionality. In the past, I've had to like manually stitch this together, like being able to do incremental testing. Like it's one thing to be able to say, we sent out this campaign and we saw based on UTM codes how many people went to the landing page and registered from our emails. But it's another thing to be able to say, because of all these other touch points that are going on, I'm going to hold out 2, 3, 5%, whatever from this email audience, and I'll send it out and I'll be able to compare the conversion rate from the the test group versus the holdout control group. Yeah, maybe walk us through like how you guys are thinking about that. And the other thing that was really cool is like in Marketo at the time that I was using it, maybe they added this now, but like you can't do A/B testing within the workflow itself. Like
Yeah.
in Customer IO, building a workflow and a journey, like you can have 17 plus different actual A/B tests all within the same flows, like all as different branches. So yeah, just curious how you guys think about that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I would say experimentation is a cornerstone of our team's approach and methodology. Being very data focused, and yeah, Customer IO does make it really easy. I'd say there's a few versions of the tests that we run within Customer IO. So the holdout test that you mentioned is a really great functionality that's within the platform, and that whether you're, let's say, trying to launch a new program and you're trying to just validate, will having something make a difference against not having anything, or you're just trying to compare like the performance of how a particular campaign influences the broader user action or life cycle. The way that Customer IO set up the holdout, it works really nicely in that it actually counts a delivery for the holdout group. So in some cases, you might end up with no stat or no data point for the holdout group at all that you didn't send the email to. And that can make tracking that cohort over time a bit more challenging, or at
Mm,
least a bit more manual for the team to do. So what the holdout functionality in Customer IO allows us to do is to essentially, based on the split that we've decided, allocate one group of the cohort into the recipient button. They'll get the variant, and one in the holdout. Customer IO will trigger a delivery for both of those, but of course, the people in the holdout don't get a subsequent metric for, let's say, open or click or anything like that. Because we have this deep integration with Segment, we actually surface all of our Customer IO platform data in Mixpanel. So of course you can get it in Customer IO, but Mixpanel we find is a lot more user friendly for us,
mm,
and so we can set up unique reports or dashboards to support experiments. Because we have that delivery event that has been fired for the holdout group, it makes cohorting the two groups exceptionally easy
very cool.
within Mixpanel, sorry, so that you can actually track the differences in behavior between both of those by just the action ID of if they receive the email or not based on that delivery event, which is super cool. And some platforms you actually don't get an event associated to the holdout group, which can make that downstream tracking a lot more challenging. And so we use that a lot within the platform. We do A/B testing both on the message level as well as the workflow level. Message level is really easy. It's all within platform. You have a scale. You can slide it to see how many people receive each variant, and you just select two different versions. Within the workflow, they have randomization logic. So you can essentially have a branch after your trigger event, and you could say 50% here, 50% there, and they can each receive a different email, but the same timing, the same whatever it is that you're testing, I guess. And that makes it also super easy as well for us to just have ongoing tests pretty much in all of our programs, more or less all of the time, whether it's on the content, the sequencing, or just in general, like a holdout test.
Very cool. Yeah, it's interesting to hear how you're pushing that into Mixpanel and being able to analyze that further, because I feel like that's like having the functionality to be able to do holdout tests is one thing. Like you can figure it out in your tool, but like what do you do with that data after, and remembering to just like go back to those experiments, because it's not as quick as an A/B test in a lot of these tools where you're setting this up and it's like manual. When I was at WordPress.com, we had an internal tool for our CDP and for a lot of this like internal platforming with data. And so when a user started a trial, we would have a daily sync that would just take a randomized group of those folks and put them into a holdout group. And those folks would just never get any email comms from us. And just so over time, we would have this like big cohort of people that just like didn't get any message from us, but like there was no functionality to just like see real time like the results of that. We'd constantly have to have a process to go back to look at that list and compare the conversion rate versus like other groups. So yeah, it's interesting here how you're using that. The other feature, not to like spend a full episode on customer IO there, but I feel like we're jamming on this a little bit. So I'm curious to hear if you guys are using this too. One thing that I fell in love with when I was using this at close was this. They call it QA draft mode, where you can essentially like build a workflow, super complex, bunch of steps. Sometimes you're like triggering off certain like data points, and you want to like test this out and like in production almost like before you press go on it. And have yet to find a tool that allows us to do it in the way that Customer IO does it, and they've been doing it for like multiple years. And I'm shocked that like other tools haven't caught up to this yet. But you can build your workflow in like your production environment with all the data triggers and everything, and you can press go, have it live, and you can see real users qualifying for different branches, and all of your actual emails aren't sent yet. They're like sent in draft mode, so you can see what they would look like, and you can make sure that like yes, this person would have qualified for that. And then you look at your liquid code and how it actually like ended up looking like. I just find that fascinating, because like I haven't found another tool that allows you to just like see what the result of your automation is in production with real users, but just not sending out messages quite yet.
Yeah, and what I really love about that feature too is like once you've confirmed too, it's like just a click to actually send that out to the rest of the users if you're doing just like a short-term holdout to
Yeah.
validate stuff, right? Yeah, it's really valuable for us too. And we've done several, let's say, new iterations of onboarding or some product notifications, and we just want to validate before we turn it on, just due to the frequency or volume of the sends for those programs that things are showing up, as they're supposed to. And like you can only see, so many examples as you're scrolling through the
Yeah.
preview with data that like once you start getting real ones in, that's when you sometimes catch errors or things like that.
Yeah, yeah, super cool. Maybe we can talk about some of the underrated tools that you mentioned on that
Yeah.
LinkedIn post. I wanted to ask you about one name particularly that jumped out to me that I wasn't familiar with, and that's Redash. I think most folks are familiar with like the tableaus and the lookers for like the bigger like BI names. One of my first startups was Clipfolio in Ottawa in the BI space. I'm familiar with like the tools for SMBs like Databox and Gecko Board and Grow and all those other tools. But yeah, I'd never heard of Redash. So why I obviously like checked it out since then. Open source tool, kind of like playing in that BI space. So yeah, just curious your thoughts on that so far.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, I'll say Buffer, we love open source tools. We try to be super open with most of our business. Our code is open as well, if people want to go check it out. And so we always are in favor of supporting businesses that kind of follow along that path. React is a really interesting tool because I mentioned we have Mixpanel, and Mixpanel's primarily our BI tool. That's what the majority of the team uses. Redash is especially useful for more complex queries, that require us to join data from multiple databases. Um, Buffer, as any tech company that's been around for over a decade, you know, we have some dust settling. We have a couple data warehouses set up, a couple databases that we pull from, and so Redash really lets myself or our data scientists and analysts write custom queries and visualize the results when data needs to be stitched across these multiple databases. And so really that's the primary usage for Redash. We also use it for exploratory work in that regard as well. So when we're doing growth analysis or anything like that, or data scientists will go in there and use Redash to do those queries and modeling as he's exploring. But it's really sort of a secondary data resource for us, second to Mixpanel.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting to hear that you're using Mixpanel in kind of like a BI perspective. Also, we use Amplitude at my current startup. Super similar
Yep.
tools. So we're using Mixpanel at Clipfolio, so I'm familiar with both. But we also use Looker at my current startup, and we use Looker at WordPress.com. Also, one of the few third party tools that we were actually paying for and not building out in house. But it's been interesting to see like the difference between this like product analytics world of Amplitude and Mixpanel, which aren't really just product analytics tools anymore. Like we just had Adam Greco from Amplitude on the show. The episode dropped last week, and he was kind of like talking about how they're using web data now, combining that with product data, and it's essentially just as powerful as a BI tool, but you can do way more deep dive analysis in like conversion rate funnels. Like you can't do that in Looker. I can't build like a funnel of my registration flow. Where are the drop offs on the steps? So I spend a lot more time in Amplitude than I do in Looker. So it's cool to hear that like yeah, Mixpanel almost plays that like BI role for your team as well.
Absolutely, and it's a highly accessible tool as well. Like I think
Mm.
once the setup is done, you don't need to know SQL or be a data scientist yourself to then go in and make your own dashboard for the product or program you're running. And to us at Buffer, like that decentralization of data to the rest of the team, being able to arm the team with insights for the product they're owning or the program they're working on is really important to us. And Mixpanel really facilitates that. And like I said, we're Redash, Looker, Tableau. You do really need either a data scientist or analyst or someone who's at least comfortable technically in SQL to model out some of those. It's not as drag and drop and modular as something like Amplitude or Mixpanel.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I was looking at like some of the Looker competitors, and some of them have like on their comparison pages, like you don't need to know Look ML. Like Look ML is like their SQL language for building anything complex. But you mentioned server side tracking at the start of our conversation, and like some of the comments on your post on the tech stack post were just like, but Simon, where is Google Analytics on your list? You're not using GA. And as a marketer myself who has not used used GA4 or Google Analytics in like 3+ years, because we've been on this amplitude train and the server
Yeah.
side also. So I'm familiar with that kind of journey there. But maybe you can unpack the decision from your perspective, moving buffers, web analytics to server side instead of client side, like tools like GA. I'm assuming you're like you said, just using a combo of Mixpanel plus Redash to analyze all that stuff.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm not surprised with that sort of feedback. Like,
Yeah.
you know it best as well. Like Google Analytics is a monolith in the
Right.
analytics game, right? Like, and it's been for years. And 10 years ago, it was incredible. Like when I was starting out in my career, the robustness of what was available then for marketing, felt really incredible. Um, it's free, it's easy to implement, more or less. It's pretty much the standard. So, I'm not surprised that there's a lot of teams, still relying on it. Buffer also used GA4 to primarily their web analytics for quite some time, actually. And actually, before I joined Buffer, they were still very much using it as the primary way to measure marketing performance and web performance. Um, the problem that I see with Google Analytics and other client-side tracking is while they're easy to use and easy to implement, which I think is the benefit for a lot of teams, I don't find the data comprehensive enough or raw enough, let's call it, to use it in a more strategic way to inform, data-based decision making for marketing. You try to get more granular in Google Analytics, you run into sampling errors, right?
Yeah.
And then how can you, trust or exactly say how much, your motions drove if it's being sampled, right? Then you're just sort of guessing. Um, and you're also more restrictive into reporting options without going into full like custom reports as well. And I think the biggest limitation to me is you just can't as easily connect the marketing and web data to the product data. Sure, you could create conversion goals and events and that sort of thing and instrument it that way, but it's not the raw product analytics. It's almost like a proxy for those events and actions.
Yeah.
And I think that's where tools like Mixpanel and Amplitude really came in and have created this ability for us to stitch those two together through server side tracking. So so the type of work that we're doing and the experimentation we're doing is like we're not really just looking at how many page loads can we get, how many signups can we get. We're tracking full funnel with a lot of the work. So we want to see, are we acquiring signups for Buffer that are actually doing something of value in the product? Are they converting? Are they activating, retaining, that sort of thing? And so, server-side tracking, really solves for most of this. I would say we're very fortunate at Buffer that our product and marketing teams work super close together naturally. We're very collaborative, and actually, like data reports into me. So that's
Hmm.
just saying something in that, marketing isn't treated as like a second-class data
Yeah.
area
Nice.
that it can be in some businesses for whatever reasons. Um, and so when I joined, I started to see these limitations. We knew GA4 was coming because I joined back in 2022. So that was sort of the year that transition was happening. Um, and, we really wanted to make this push to server side tracking. We had this set up at Shopify before I left, and it was extremely valuable. So the team and I, we implemented this through CDP segment. So which that the segment captures all of our on-site events like page loads. We have button clicks instrumented, a whole bunch of really interesting events. Some of these are out of the box with segment, like page loads. You really, once it's like loaded up onto the website, segment just capture those. Others we've had to define and instrument ourselves, like individual nomenclature for different buttons and CTAs on the site to track their effectiveness. Um, One thing we did have to do as part of this was develop a couple models on our own, so that we could measure sessions on the site in the same
Hmm.
way as we traditionally do in marketing. Um, you know, we capture events on a page load level with segment, and that's sort of how Mixpanel showcases data as well. And so through some custom modeling, we built out like a session model that strings together page load events into full sessions based on a bunch of different inputs, and that'll be a whole other conversation if I get into the intricacies of that. Which allows us to really categorize groups of page loads together, map out full user sessions on the website, and then into the product itself. And then with that, we were able to build on top of it a custom attribution model to measure, where are these users coming from? Are they coming from organic? Are they coming from paid ads? etc. There's a ton of different signals and layers that go onto that. We use the refer property. We use gclid to track all of our conversion ads through Google Ads, our conversion events to Google Ads. Sorry. So there's a bunch of different signals that layer into that. And then the front end experience is really powered by Redash and Mixpanel, right? So the team can go in there, and they can really, build reports for, a blog or for an experiment or for a particular launch that we have where we've introduced a new page, and then be able to tie all that back to, let's say, the launch objectives of adoption or retention for that product case. So it's been an incredible addition to our marketing stack, having server side tracking. And like what I would say for any team that's, has the ability to implement something like this and move away from client side, I would say go for it, because, you're going to end up with boundless amounts of insight and data that then you can model and use to ideate, to run tests, to do a whole bunch of, really impactful data informed work that Google Analytics and these other tools, I just don't think they give you in the same way.
Yeah, yeah, definitely agree. I had to go down the technical rabbit hole of server side versus client side when I was at Close, because we were doing part of the same that we were using segments, and we are comparing segment web activity data to GA, and we
Oh
just like
yeah,
couldn't or like figure out the discrepancies between the two. And then like obviously through time we discovered that like most of the discrepancies were because of client side events firing versus server side events. So got really deep on there, but yeah, the refresher was a conversation we had with someone from MetaRouter, Michelle, who is a director of product marketing there, and they're like a CDI tool essentially that's like making this easier for marketers and data team that are building this like composable stack. So instead of maybe like a CDP and a CDP housing all of that data in like their own kind of storage spot,
yeah.
this composable route is kind of like leverage your own warehouse. And so MetaRouter like collects all of that data, pushes it to your warehouse, and you would use something like Census to reverse ETL and connect all that stuff and throw it into customer IO or something. But I want to talk about one thing you mentioned that I thought was really fascinating: data reports into growth marketing. One of the things from my stint at a bigger company at WordPress.com was this like internal versus third party tooling debate that we had all of the time with a lot of resources. So our CEO and founder Matt Mullen was really big on this like dichotomy of like why pay a third party tool for something when we have really smart people internally who can potentially build something just as good, and then we can go to market and sell that after also. So we had those
Sure.
battles all the time. And I know you mentioned that the internal custom experimentation platform is something that's built out internally at Buffer, and we had the same thing at WordPress.com, but it was supported by a pretty big team of data engineers and data scientists, and it was really good. And like when we had issues with it, like we almost had like a support team to kind of go to or whatever. What I found shocking from knowing that Buffer also does this internally, obviously like the smaller team size, but like the salary benchmarking shows like the team makeup, and I was just like, what? There's only one person on the data team at Buffer who's supporting all of these things. What's the story there? Really curious.
Yeah, really good question. And I would say it's probably generous to call our in-house platform a platform. It's maybe more of a methodology. I think
Okay.
being able to have, server-side tracking and everything in Mixpanel, it's really this exercise of how you tag the variants and that. In product, we are using something like Split, which is an out of house platform to do sort of product testing. But yeah, on our end, we do it all in-house. Yeah, the data one's a really interesting question. I think, one thing I really admire about Buffer is, we're a small team by design. We're a bootstrap company. At one point there was some investors, but the team bought them out over time. And with that, the goal has really been, let's create a sustainable sized company that doesn't have to continuously scale up both in terms of growth and in people. And I think that's a really, first of all, unique type of business in tech. What this means for the composition of the team is that we're always in flux, I guess you could
Hmm.
say. So, in some eras or seasons of buffer, you'll have greater investment in certain areas, and teams might be a lot bigger than they are in the current state, and vice versa. And I would say, data today is in a much different place than it was, I would say, 3 years ago or 5 years ago at Buffer. I would say for a few reasons. So one of the big tenets that we have for the data team at Buffer is this concept of decentralization. And I mentioned this earlier. The idea that a team armed with data insights relevant to their area, whether it's a product manager or engineer in their little pod on their products, or it's content marketers on the area of the website they're focusing on, having that data really accessible and really be really intimate with that data can create a lot of you know level of ownership and a lot of impactful work for the team there. And so over the year, our data team has changed in size, for a variety of reasons. Some people have left, some people have changed roles, that sort of thing. But during that transition, we've made the choice to keep it small for now, and really focus on leveling up the data expertise throughout the org. So,
Hmm.
data engineering, as an example, we had a couple data engineers in the past. How we're handling this now at Buffer is that the engineers and engineering managers within product pods are now responsible for the data engineering
Mm.
components for their
Okay.
product. So rather than data acting as like a service line, which it does in many organizations, hey, you guys figure out the issue
Yeah.
related to the data pipeline. It's now on the onus is now on the engineering team
Okay.
itself to make sure those are built properly, they're instrumented properly, there's a tracking plan. Um, and each team, has an individual or two within their engineering group that, takes on that responsibility. And that, we do have a more centralized team, the one that works with me, that covers more of our horizontal use cases. So, our data scientists and analysts largely does the majority of the modeling for the company where it's required, as well as like we do a lot of deep growth analysis on, why certain things are happening and how we can improve them. And that's largely what this individual does. We have a separate central, we call infrastructure team, that is largely built up of senior engineers, and they also support horizontal data engineering requirements for the broader company. So there are, of course, ones specific to individual products and use cases, but there are a lot of them in terms of managing our different DBs, managing the quality and accuracy of the pipelines, the reverse ETLs, all those things generally fall to that infrastructure engineering team. So when I say data reports to growth marketing and growth more broadly, it's really sort of the data science and data analyst type components of that team that work deeply with us, while the data engineering side of the coin is really being propped up by the engineering org at the moment.
Very interesting. I love that you guys are essentially not forcing, but like highly encouraging engineering managers and senior engineers to expand into that data engineering world if it's not something that they've done yet. I find that really cool because there is like so much overlap in that world. Like I'm kind of like in growth operations at my current startup and
Yeah.
often playing this like data product manager role where I'm like translating marketing and growth requirements to a data person. But then I also need to do that for the engineer who is building out the custom registration flow. It would be really cool if those two were one person because when we're making changes to the reg flow or in the product, that person is also thinking of the pipeline. And if we're going to migrate the like calendar tool, we're doing it in a way that like the piping stays in place and the tables stay in place and all we're doing is changing the front end. So I think there's a lot of like long term, also like personal future proofing advantages there for the engineers on staff. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of the advantages of a smaller organization like Buffer
Yeah.
as well, is, it's more of that, startup type atmosphere. Everyone's hands on deck. Everyone wears multiple hats, myself included. And a big part of our culture is, encouraging that personal and professional growth while you're at Buffer. So, we're always saying, how do we get, 40, 50% better every year individually so that, we can improve Buffer in the same way.
Yeah, love that mindset. Maybe you didn't put too much thought into the order of the tech stack list when you shared this out, but I thought it was really interesting how you started off with PM tools, project management tools. You got
Yes.
Notion and Jira kind of listed on there. And in a separate post, you also shared insights on how you at Buffer run sprint cycles with your team. And I've done this successfully at past companies when we were all bought in and we had a lot of collaborative nature, and all these other teams were using sprint models as well. We're just like, hey, like let's give this a shot for marketing too. But it's also failed spectacularly at other companies where we were a bit more on the ops side, like a bit more supporting function, and it was just impossible to plan for like all the ad hoc shit that just like came up out of nowhere. And it's like, why are we spending a full day every 2 weeks sprint planning for like shit we want to do next week when like we have no idea what's gonna like fall on our plate, and we're a startup and we need to like react and move fast. So I'm really curious to ask you, in your opinion, like the times that this has worked well for you, like what do you think is the key to running successful agile or sprint models for marketing teams?
Yeah, I'd say, if you ask anyone who works with me, I am definitely a big process and documentation kind of guy. I always encourage our teams to stay super organized, keep our workflows crisp, because I have a belief that, if we're clear on how we do the things, then we're able to do them with a greater degree of focus and clarity, and in a more impactful with, tuning out our distractions. Um, and maybe that probably influenced me putting it first, but honestly, it was really just a random selection. I think when I was putting together the post, um, honestly, I love the agile approach. I haven't always worked in this either, but I've become a big fan over time. I've worked in the traditional annual planning cycle. You're working on monthly roadmaps, that sort of thing. That's pretty traditional in most marketing groups, I would say. But in my last few years at Shopify, we sort of pivoted the growth org to sprints, and it was really interesting to see the benefits that came out of that. And there's a lot of parallels to what we're doing at Buffer that happened there as well. One of the biggest ones, and I think you kind of touched on this, is alignment to the other teams.
Mhm.
So, especially in a product-led growth company like Buffer, there's no sales team that marketing is supporting. There's no account management team. We're really that for the product team in many ways. And so, being able to align our working and planning cadence with the different product groups has been extremely beneficial to make sure that like our roadmaps are aligned, our go-to-market motion and programs related to that can align to what product is doing outside of purely just launching new released features and things like that. um, and so that's been incredibly valuable for us. We do support that entire go to market motion as a marketing team, and aligning those roadmaps make a ton of sense. um, I do think outside of alignment, for teams to be successful in adopting more of an agile workflow. So we do 2 week sprints, and our planning cadence is about every quarter. So we actually don't have annual plans at all on marketing at Buffer. We have themes and goals and things we're trying to accomplish, and targets and forecasts that span throughout the year. But the actual work we're planning to do gets planned on a quarterly basis, and our execution cycle is about 2 weeks. This allows us to have a couple things, focus and clarity on our work. It allows us to be able to pivot as things come up, and so we're not necessarily tied to things we put on a roadmap that are coming up 6 months down the line. New information comes in, and we can easily reprioritize and do something different, or go after something more impactful. But to be able to do that successfully, yeah, the team needs a couple things. One is clarity. So clarity on the goals and targets that we're doing. You mentioned there's a lot of distractions that can come up, especially for a marketing team. We have people pinging us probably every day saying, "Oh, this word is misspelled," or "This button isn't working right anymore." A lot of that kind of stuff comes
Yeah.
up, and we do have to get to it, but it allows us to give a sense of prioritization to those items. Some of those are urgent. Yeah, if you can't sign up because the button's not working, we want to make sure we address that immediately. Copy on one of the commercial pages on the website can get addressed eventually. It might not be the most pressing issue, at least in our mind. And so having clarity on goals of sort of what we're trying to achieve this cycle, what we're trying to achieve this quarter, can really help focus the team, and keep that focus during that time. And I would say clarity on what we're trying to accomplish too. So what's really nice about 2 weeks or 3 week sprints, let's call them, is that being time bound in such a clear way, it gives us a finite amount of time to reach a milestone. with work,
Mhm.
whether that's actually shipping an experiment, which we try to do once a cycle, or making progress on a more long-term project. Being able to actually have, okay, these every 2 weeks naturally can be marked towards a milestone in our work, and having that defined time horizon to get the work done really helps focus the team towards progress versus letting some things drag on because we want to release it this quarter. We want to release it this cycle, which is only 2 weeks as an example. um, to get that alignment and clarity, though, rituals are really important as well. So we do grooming meetings just like a product team. We meet every Monday to align on the work in that week, as well as the progress on tasks within the cycle. That's our full team. So it includes not just the marketers, but also our marketing counterparts, I call them, that work on our team. So our engineers, UX designers, our data scientists, those individuals are able to join that meeting and input and share related to the work. I think team buy-in is super important too. So
Mhm.
where I've seen this not work out is when some teams within marketing or members of the team just don't want to lean into the process.
Yeah.
Uh, they don't want to use Jira or the task management tool. They want to just they don't want to be bound to 2 weeks. Maybe their work. And we have this case of buffer. Some of our team's works don't fit neatly into 2 week cycles. Growth
Mhm.
marketing, we're a little bit more project based, time experiment based. Whereas our content marketers, they're producing X amount of content every week, and that's sort of an always on initiative. It does
Right.
fit within the cycle, but it's not as clean as, let's say, it could be for like a project based initiative. So that buy-in is really important. The team needs to adopt the process, believe in it, the tools that you're using, and I think to me, the most important thing is actually in the name. It's being willing to be agile. I think the
Mm.
way sometimes I've seen people use agile as just a shorter form of the regular approach and planning. It's just, okay, let's just chunk this into smaller buckets, but we're still
Right.
thinking really long term with our planning. We're still sticking to whatever we committed to at the start of the quarter. What I really like and what we try to encourage a buffer is a willingness to actually be agile with your work. Um, what that means is be willing to pivot as things change, as information is discovered towards things that will actually be impactful to your goals.
Mm.
So, in many ways, we have this concept of like test and learn towards a bigger initiative within the growth marketing team. We might have this hypothesis that there's this big kind of program we can do that is going to drive tons of leads for the business or whatever, and we try to test into that. Many times, early tests will start to disprove that hypothesis. And we're able to use that information to actually pivot away from what might not be, uh, the most impactful project, but could have resulted in a ton of sunk cost fallacy where we're saying, hey, we've invested, 2 months in here. We have to get this project at the gate because we've done all this work and we don't want it to be for naught. We actually, the agile process actually allows us to say, okay, we're looking at these iterations that we have released along the way. We're getting new information and we can use that to pivot entirely or make new decisions that allow us to evolve what we're working on into something that's going to be more impactful for the business. I think that's the key to the value unlock for agile marketing structure is that actual willingness to say, okay, let's be agile, let's pivot,
Mhm.
and let's use this 2 week threshold as that opportunity to do so.
Such a great answer, Simon. There's so many jumping off points there. I feel like this could be a second episode in and of itself. I think there's a lot of key learnings there, and I especially like the point about just like we're doing agile because agility is essentially like one of our key values here, and like that's maybe one of the best ways to get people to buy into this because I think you're right. Like where this hasn't been successful for me at past companies was when we just had a process that wasn't agile and a lot of people were just like using the tools they were familiar with, and like we were creating a lot of change in their structure, so there was like a change management process that made this really tricky. But I think there's a lot of wisdom in your answer there. I got two more questions for you. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a question of like going from an enterprise VC backed company to a bootstrap startup, like 18,000 person company at Shopify. I don't know how big it was when you left, but like 75 ish people, bootstrap profitable startup at Buffer now. Complete opposite ends of the tech spectrum, right? Like you've got two completely different sides of the coin. Walk us through the decision of like why Buffer, obviously like a big name in tech and cool company, but like why not like another big, 1,000+ person company, since you like spent 7 years in that mindset, like building teams there? And what do you love more about the current setup at Buffer?
Yeah, I've been asked this question a lot actually, because it is quite the shift. And personally, like I loved my time at Shopify. I was there at a very exciting time for the business. There's a lot of scale during that era. I joined back in 2015, and I think there were probably about 900, 800 employees at that
Okay.
time. So still much larger than Buffer. And then once I left, 7 years later or so, yeah, the company had scaled up to 14,000, I believe. So a massive difference over those 7 years,
Yeah.
and being along for that ride in itself was an experience, I'd say, to really be able to work at a business that's really on a hyper growth path, and be part of that you know journey of Shopify growing up into the enterprise company we know today, and being along that in my own career as well, was really awesome, because it gave me a lot of opportunities to work in a variety of different departments and teams and problem spaces within Shopify, which I'm very grateful for, and was really rewarding. But I think eventually, at the end of a 7 year stint, sometimes we just want to work on new problems, I guess. And I think it was just, for me, it was my time to go try to solve similar problems in a different context. And I think for myself, that was the personal growth opportunity like I was looking for at that time in my career, of just, let's go do this somewhere else, and see, if I can be successful in another business, I guess. Um, and Buffer, I've known Buffer for a long time now. They're pretty well known in the social media space. Going back to my days in the agency, it was like the tool that we used to
Mm.
schedule and manage social media. So it's always been something I was aware of, and it's really one of those darling companies, I think, in tech. It has a really well known reputation for its employee first culture. They're very innovative in a lot of cultural and operational ways, and that they were probably one of the first tech companies to be fully remote, well before the pandemic and anything like that, which is really really exciting. And I think one of the reasons that Buffer had always been on a radar for me as a company that, like, maybe I would love to go work for one day. Um, and I joined at a time at Buffer was going through, Buffer itself was going through a bit of like a transition, and coming out of the pandemic, a lot of companies were feeling that. The Great Resignation had people kind of leaving and changing roles and teams, and we saw that at Shopify as
Yeah.
well, and I'm sure every company did. And because of that, when I joined in early 2022 at Buffer, the marketing team was actually going through a little bit of a reboot.
Mm.
A lot of senior people had taken the opportunity to go somewhere else and go on their next chapter. And for me, there was a really clear and unique opportunity to join an awesome team doing really cool cultural stuff that was very innovative, a team that has, helped establish social media management as an area and a product offering in the industry, uh, and to join at a time where they were working through their next era of business growth and marketing for Buffer.
Mm.
And to me, to do this at a company that is well established, that has product market fit, has a well-known brand, but was still not a 14,000 person
Yeah.
company, right, was really appealing to me as a
Mm.
growth practitioner. There was a lot of interesting opportunities from the problem space that I felt, hey, I can really help Buffer, evolve and grow in terms of the maturity of the growth and growth marketing areas. Um, but then also, just part of me was looking for an opportunity to work with a smaller size team, if I'm being honest.
Mm.
Um, it's one thing to work in growth and marketing and do so impactfully in a VC backed organization that has endless pockets. It's another thing to go and try to flex those muscles and do the same thing in a bootstrapped company that doesn't have the access to the same sort of capital as Shopify did. And that was just a really interesting problem and opportunity for me to work on, to grow professionally, to work with a brand that I had a lot of respect for, um, and to work within a new set of rules, I guess, and try to grow myself as a marketer. And so all of those things came together. It's been an incredible almost 2.5 years now, because it
Hmm.
feels like it was just yesterday that I joined. And honestly, all these reasons that I wanted to join are all the reasons that I'm loving what we do every day. I love being closer to the work again. I love the size of the team, the type of people and organization, and our mission that we're pursuing. Um, and just the people in the work has been really great to get involved with.
So cool to hear the journey, the big change there. And you mentioned like being lucky that you landed at Buffer, but I think it's definitely a two-sided luck there. I think they're lucky to have landed a leader who has spent time at a company as prestigious as Shopify in like 7 years. Like 7 years is like almost like two full careers these days in tech. So kudos to you. And yeah, I think Buffer's is lucky to have a hands-on leader like you, and definitely needed in a bootstrap environment. Simon, really appreciate your time. I got one last question for you. We asked this to all of our guests. You're a director of growth, a mentor, a professor, a traveler, hiker, golfer, gamer, weightlifter, gardener. You got a ton of stuff going on in your life. How do you remain happy and successful in your career, and how do you find balance between all the things you're working on while staying happy?
I would say working for an organization whose product you love and values are aligned with yours, and like the way they operate aligns with your personal convictions, is absolutely fundamental to
Mm.
being happy in what you do. You spend 8+ hours every day, 5 days a week, at this work and at this job, and so finding a place that really aligns with you, makes all the difference. I'd also say for myself, self personally, uh, I found someone once mentioned this to me in terms of, I was looking for my next thoughts of career and growth opportunities. This was before I even left Shopify. And one thing I was told was always to avoid chasing titles, avoid chasing, brand names, and chase interesting problems.
Mm.
Problems that you enjoy working on, that give you a degree of fulfillment, that challenge you intellectually, uh, can make going to work, the difference between hating your job and loving your job, right? If you like to work on tough problems. I'd also say the people you work with can be just as important as the work you're doing or what you work on. Um, I've worked in highly performant, high trust teams. I've worked in low trust teams as well, that have a little bit more chaos and a little bit more, tumultuousness to them. And I would take a high trust team any day over that, regardless of what business and role I was in. And then, I think balance is something that personally I'm on a personal journey to have more balance in my life in general. It can be hard when you're so invested and interested in like the professional space that you operate in. But for me, it's just really making space for that balance between work and play, knowing, when you need to turn off and turn into the other parts of your life. Your partners, your families, your hobbies, those types of things become super important to achieve that level of balance. And I'm lucky where I work at Buffer, which is a people first organization, who really values having strong balance for the employees. So we're really enabled to be able to pursue that in our day to day, but also outside of work. And so that's what I would say. If anyone listening is struggling with balance, just got to make the time, find ways to split up your day. I end work every day. I go straight to the gym, and so when I come back, my work brain is turned off, and like
Nice.
my personal brain is turned on.
Yeah, such great advice. Love the answer there. Your first point about like picking an organization, the product you love, but also like the values are aligned with you. My wife and I are watching the Ashley Madison documentary on
Oh
Netflix
yeah,
right now, and I was just like, how the hell do people who worked at that company like were able to like find any type of joy or happiness in selling that product? But yeah,
Oh my
Simon, really
gosh.
appreciate your time, man. This has been super fun. Time has flown by. I think this is going to be super valuable for folks that are really curious what the heck is in Buffer's tech stack. I think you did a great job walking us through that, and a ton of value sitting with you today. So really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Phil. Anytime.